Hello again, book lovers. And this is a book I'm going to deal with twice, as it's about the old philosophical problem of freedom versus determinism. It's Freedom Evolves by Daniel C. Dennett, in which he tries to convince me, and anyone who reads it, that free will exists. There is a sliver of action in which we can genuinely be said to be consciously making a free choice. Well, you might think that's obvious, isn't it? And the thing is, we live in a world where we act as if we do have free choice. That is undeniable. We talk about hypotheses, we make promises, we convince ourselves that we took decisions. According to Robert Sapolsky, who I'll have to read next, this is all pie in the sky and hogwash. The strange thing for me is that I'm approaching this book from Sapolsky's point of view. I need to be convinced that we have free will. And as I'm going to chew this issue over in my Mud Wrestling with Pigs channel, I'll leave a lot of the arguments out and just try to concentrate on the book as a reading experience. The arguments, of course, are well rehearsed and quite knotty, and also informed by recent developments in neuroscience, which, of course, is Dennett's speciality. And I like the guy. I think he's right in saying that if you're going to talk about the mind and the brain as philosophers like to, then we really should find out what the mind is, how the brain works, etc., etc. And we're travelling further and further down the path towards that aim. Scientists can provoke specific hallucinations in people's brains. Look what Musk and Neuralink are trying to achieve. In any case, the battle lines are drawn. It's Dennett and Ridley against Sapolsky and others. You'll note that they're both evolutionary biologists, so we have a little spat within the same discipline here. Okay, this book, very entertaining, whether you agree with the conclusions or not. We begin with an overall discussion, rehearses some of the old chestnuts, and jump straight into chapter 2, a tool for thinking about determinism. Dennett here is very strict on the definition of determinism. It's not the same as inevitability. And if that's a little bit of a mind bender, well, this is the book for you, because he's trying to explain what is the difference. And how do we do that? Well, we go first of all to Conway's Amazing Game of Life, which, if you haven't investigated it and you're interested in these mental matters and computer programming and philosophical issues, it's quite a tool. It exists in a kind of Laplacian universe. Laplace's demon, by the way, and don't the philosophers love their demons? Descartes had one, Nietzsche had one, and Laplace had one. And Laplace's demon says, if you can tell me where every atom and molecule and etc. etc. is now, at time t in the universe, I can predict the future. The moving finger writes, and having writ, nothing can change a word of it, yes, but what about the future? That surely must be open. Well, we'd go to a simple, two-dimensional world of on or off cells to start our quest. Chapter 3 takes us back to more of the traditional philosophical quandaries, such as Austin's putt on the golf course, when he says, I could have done it better. But could he? And he also talks about Martin Luther's famous statement, here I stand, I can do no other. Is that true, Martin? Could you have chosen otherwise? Chapter 4 takes us to philosophical libertarianism. We're not talking about politics here. And we introduce one of Dennett's famous phrases. If you make yourself really small, you can externalize virtually everything. That's a nice little nugget to chew on. Dennett's writing is full of his own neologisms and ideas. We've got bootstraps and free-floating rationales and skyhooks and the magic feather in Dumbo. Please don't take away our illusion of free will. A similar argument is made by Dawkins in Weaving the Rainbow to counteract the idea that all this scientific analysis is taking magic out of the world. Possibly beauty, art, hope. Well, it isn't. That's what Daniel's going to tell us here, and even Sapolsky is going to say the same. In chapters 5 and 6, we look at the idea of whether genetics is determinant and the huge background of previous experiments in trial and error and the forming of a cultural milieu in which we operate. While discussing Keynes' work, at the end of chapter 4, Dennett concludes the ultimate responsibility requirement, which Keynes proposes, turns out to, quote, burden the specs of a free agent with conditions that are both unmotivated and undetectable. If you're happy with the occasional sentence like that, plough on. Much has been made lately of the experiment in which it seems that our conscious decisions are taken unconsciously before we, in inverted commas, consciously choose them. You can track this to a kind of 300 to 500 millisecond window, and experiments have been done to show that this is the case. However, Keynes' model is trying to locate exactly where the decision-making process is, and Dennett, of course, resists at every step the idea of invoking what he calls the Cartesian theatre, this homunculus that sits in our heads observing our minds. But it's a strange thing, and I've noticed it in myself, and I'm sure anyone that reads this book will try to catch themselves thinking, try to analyse their actions. Why did I do this and then that? Was that logistically the best way to do things? Nonetheless, despite this observed lapse in time, Dennett tries to shave a couple of 100 milliseconds off on either side until we get to a point where we can say an instantaneous decision has genuinely been made. Chapter 7 examines morality, and a lot of this is couched within a game of life stroke prisoner's dilemma type situations. By the way, Dennett makes an excellent point about all these computer runs, that they get free energy, something I hadn't thought about. You can put all the models up on a computer you want, but you depend on electricity to make the models run. And in other situations in life, we don't get that free energy. Chapter 8 examines the idea of self, another philosophical chestnut, and how this is related to conscious will. Daniel Wegner's work is discussed. Here's one of his quotes from The Illusion of Conscious Will. Illusory or not, conscious will is the person's guide to his or her own moral responsibility for action. That's a kind of anodyne statement, isn't it? But a strange statement. Illusory or not, this thing drives us. So it might not exist. It might just be our way of coping with things. And so we arrive at the final chapters, 9 and 10. 9 goes back to a little bit of evolutionary biology, talking about the idea of reasons and rationality. And, as all the way through the book, we are peppered with amusing thought experiments. Finally arriving at chapter 10, the future of human freedom, which is basically a resume of what's gone before, with a kind of positive, optimistic outlook looking towards the future. That was a good read, and it had me scratching my head. I'm still not convinced, but the point of these reviews isn't to say, yes, he was right, or no, she was wrong. It is about the reading experience, and I was very engaged intellectually by this book. It ran over some of the things that I already knew from Dennett's philosophy, but it presented some other new things, or, as perhaps Sapolsky might say, new desperate attempts to prove to us that we have a spark of human free will. But we don't really. Or do we?